And so welcome to the School Grown webinar. I'm going to start with some technical details. So by default, I'm asking that everybody is put on mute, and I will try to monitor this throughout the webinar. This is to reduce the background noise so that we can make sure to hear the presentation clearly. However, there will be time for a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, and that'll be an opportunity when we can go more into a conversation style. But in the meantime, this will be a time to sit back and listen. We have a really exciting presentation coming up. So thank you all for joining in. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great. Before I start, let me go over some of the technical details. So as I mentioned, we'll begin with everybody on mute and to reduce background noise. There will be time for Q&A, and so the way to ask questions is to put them into the chat box. You can see that you can type in chat. You can even private message chat somebody if you have a side conversation that needs to happen. And so the questions can be framed in the chat box. You can also, there is a little option to raise your hand. And so when it comes time for Q&A, I'll be moderating those questions that come up. So it is my pleasure. Just going to make sure everybody's on mute who's listening. Okay, so it's my pleasure to host this webinar on behalf of the New Brunswick Food Security Action Network. My name is Laura Rainsborough, and I'm the network director. The New Brunswick Food Security Action Network is a provincial nonprofit that has a vision of New Brunswick that is informed, connected, and engaged in food security for all. So the way that we realize this vision is through conferences, events, activities such as Everybody Eats, which we had an engagement process ongoing last year, and we are moving into the next phase of Everybody Eats very soon. We also administer the Community Food Mentors program. We're always looking for new ways to keep people informed, connected, and engaged. So we've launched these webinars as a way to do that. This is our second ever webinar, so we are very, very much welcoming feedback on the process. And so I'll put up a link in the chat box later to who you can connect with to send in your feedback. We'd love to hear what you think of this. Today's webinar is on the topic of School Grown, which is a program, a schoolyard farming project in Toronto through FoodShare Toronto. Let's see, so FoodShare Toronto is a nonprofit that has existed for decades in Toronto and has built up a number of incredibly inspiring programs. The Good Food Box, mobile and good food markets, student nutrition programs. The programs really are all so inspiring. And our presenter today is Director of Programs at FoodShare Toronto. Her name is Katie German, and she's going to be speaking specifically about School Grown Toronto. So Katie, as Director of Programs at FoodShare Toronto, she oversees the student nutrition, food literacy, urban agriculture, community food animation, and Indigenous food access programs happening across the city. Her background is in teaching, farming, and community organizing. So without further ado, I know we're all here to hear what Katie has to say. I'm going to hand it over to Katie German.
That's fun. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Okay, thanks so much everyone for joining today. I'm really excited to talk about School Grown. It's a program that's really close to my heart. I was involved from the start to what it is now, a pretty established schoolyard farming program. What I wanted to do today is just tell you the story of how we got started and exactly what makes School Grown work, but hopefully provide a good amount of time to hear questions from you about what from our experience could maybe translate to your community and be replicated there, and what you're really looking for. So I'm going to Laura, I think I need to be a co-host for, let's do that. And then I'll put up my slides here so we can show, it's mainly photos that I want to share with you today. So, view slideshow, great. So there's my email address, just if you want to note it, if you want to get in touch, it'll be up again at the end. But first we wanted to talk about why schoolyard farming is important. So if we think of schools learning the ABCs, and we want to talk about the ABCs of food literacy, if I ask that A, does that A look familiar to folks? Usually yes. When I do this with students and teachers, it's very quick to say that A is craft. What about this one? B, C, D, E, F. So these are all fairly recognizable fast food logos. And we think often that students of any age, and especially adults, are really quick to name these out when we do these in schools. If I ask you to name this locally grown vegetable, you can think to yourself if you can recognize that one, or this one, or this one. We have celery root, purple kale, and purple carrots. Often when we do this with people of all ages, some people who are really familiar with food, which might be this crowd that I'm talking to today, are quick to name it, but they're often a little bit slower than when we talk about those brands. But if I ask you to name this seed that grows into something that you probably eat every single day, I wonder if anyone knows that one. You can take a minute. So this is onions. And if I ask you to name that seed, this is actually spinach. And this one here is beets. So I've done this session before and folks say, well, what would I need to know what those seeds are? And I think the point we want to make is that by the time someone finishes high school, they should be able to recognize seeds, and they should be able to recognize what you do with those seeds and how to grow their own food. And that's an important part of understanding the whole food system, is that it's not just about nutrition education, but people can cook and grow and
that's awesome.
And feed their family. So this right here is a picture of a schoolyard farm. And the other point I want to make is that what FoodShare is doing and what schoolyard farms across the country are doing is not new, that this is a generations old activity of feeding your community and feeding your family and taking care of the people around you, and that feeding yourself was an important lifelong skill. So that kind of sets the context for our work here. This picture here is Bendale BTI, which stands for Business and Technical Institute. It's a high school here in Toronto. In 2009, that school had a very large, especially for Toronto standards, lawn. And they came to FoodShare and said, we really want to do something with our lawn. We have a horticulture program here where students are learning about growing plants. How can we connect that to growing food? So this is now the front lawn of the school. We've also expanded into another 1/4 acre in the back lawn of the school. So altogether, it's about a 1/2 acre of what used to just be grass and regularly mowed, and that was the only thing that was happening in that space. Particularly in high schools, green spaces they're not sites where like recess is happening, and like major play spaces, so there's a lot of open space. So when that project started, we had 1 year of funding from, I believe, the Ministry of Environment. And as projects go, you can always find funding for a new project. And you can usually find funding to fund a full year, where you can pay staff and pay for soil and pay for seeds. And that's what paid for these raised beds and these lush gardens to be established. What we ran into is in year 2, that funding was up, which is a common story across the country in provinces where you can get funding to test something new, but it's really hard to find funding to sustain a program, even when you can prove that that program is really effective. So in year 2, the folks, I wasn't working on this project at the time, but the folks working on that project really just cobbled together as many $1,000 grants as they could find to try and piece together enough to hire somebody to work over the summer, and to have some students volunteer. That year is also the year that I was working at FoodShare, but I quit because I wanted to farm. So here's me and my drive across the country. I actually left FoodShare and I went out to Vancouver. And when I was in Vancouver, I worked at this place, which is a very magical and inspiring urban farm called Soul Food Street Farms. So this whole plot here is a vacant parking lot that has about a 9-foot, it's sunken in, so it has like a 9-foot chain link fence above it. Prior to the garden being here, there wasn't really much going on in the space. And so I did a full season farm apprenticeship at a farm that was dedicated to trying to think of how do we use these sort of vacant, underutilized public spaces, especially in cities, which is important in places like Vancouver and Toronto, where it doesn't feel like you have a lot of space. How can we turn those into places that are generating a lot of food with the goal of employment and the goal of social inclusion and drawing people in through food and farming? So the year that I was there, we turned this lot, which was a former gas station, like downtown, but in a bit of a more industrial area. Like across the street, there is a fish processing plant, so a bit of a industrial zone. And we turned that lot into 4 200 feet long high tunnels. So this is when I was getting really inspired about how could we use spaces that are just empty and turn them into sites of food production that involve training people, providing employment, and building communities. So here's our high tunnels that we built. Tomatoes and melons we grew in there. They were the most delicious things I ever ate my whole life. Here's a picture of some of the strawberries that we were growing. So really focused on how do we grow the most amount of food for the people around us. This was our other site, which was a 2-acre parking lot that once a year acted as a parking lot for Cirque du Soleil, and for like about 2 weeks, and for the rest of the time it was empty, and we turned it into this market garden. And this is only half of the full site. Around that same time that I was farming, I was also waking up really early to call the folks in FoodShare, who were my friends, who were trying to think of, we have this garden at Bendale BTI, this high school. We can't figure out how to make it sustainable when we don't have funding. And we also had the opportunity to work at another school. This school, very different than Bendale BTI. This school was downtown. And do you see that little 10 square foot stretch of grass? That is the entirety of the green space that this school has right on the street level there. But up above the roof is actually a rooftop garden that just sat empty. So this is Eastdale Collegiate. When they built the school, they built it with a rooftop tennis court up there. And what we were able to do is create a new design, access some funding. Again, year 1 funding is usually pretty easy to get, and turn it into a rooftop high school garden. So then we said, how do we make this sustainable? Is to start to treat it, instead of a school garden, is to run it more like a farm. And a farm is thinking of things like high yields, high production, and job creation. And that's our shift between calling it a farm rather than a garden, even though my grandparents in North Dakota would not consider this a farm, but that's okay. And some of you, depending on how much space you have in New Brunswick, this might not be considered a farm. But for us, the act of selling food commercially has that sort of like farm distinction. So we said, instead of having separate school gardens, we're going to run a farming project called School Grown. And what we want to do is provide paid work and school credit and meaningful mentorship to young people who are in those schools through reimagining what we could do with school spaces. So what we do every year is we hire students. They get paid after school jobs during the school year, paid during March break to do all our seed starting, and paid full-time summer jobs over the summer months in July and August. So we have a lot of different ways that students can engage. Some of them can only handle part-time, and some of them are really looking for the full-time. We're up to hiring about 40 students every year in paid work. That's including like some students just working 2 hours every week after school and some doing full-time. The other thing we worked out with our school board is a co-op placement. So students who are able or who are eligible to get workplace credits can be placed with us. So they're still going to their school every day, but they're placed with us as their employer. And they're doing a work placement full-time every day. This picture here of the student holding that piece of paper, he thought that he had to return to school for an extra semester. This was on like the last day of August, so before the Labor Day weekend when he would have returned. And he went into the school to register, and they said that he had got enough credits over the summer months and that he didn't actually have to come back. So he came back we were harvesting out front, and he came outside and he just looked stunned and he said, "I think I just graduated. And he was like, what do we do? And I'm like, I think we take a picture. So that was like, he just graduated. So part of it is thinking of sometimes funding and employment might be difficult to manage given your access to grants. But looking at what are the other types of things that act as currency for the people that you're working with. So for our students, we prioritize opportunities for youth who are behind in credit attainment, and then finding ways to actually get them school credit. And often we can get them school credit and pay at the same time. So part of how we do that is we focus on growing a lot of food, as much as we possibly can in the space that we have. And then part of our vision is that we're selling that to folks who will pay a high price for it, relatively, which is a distinction between some of FoodShare's other programs that are rooted in ideas of food access and affordability. So we're selling to things like fine dining restaurants because they're willing to pay a higher price point for it, especially because it ends up being a good news story for them because they can then say on their menu and on their social media that they're buying from a schoolyard farming project. So in this case, this photo is the Chef's House restaurant at George Brown College, which is their fine dining sort of like learning school, but it's still like a fancy restaurant. And so we provide produce, they buy produce from us. And in this case, I dropped off some salad greens, and that the head chef there, George Lee, he put it all out on the counter and made the students come over, and he made them taste. And these are all students who are learning culinary arts. So we have students from culinary arts learning about food growing, and we have our students, we actually have them come in and eat a meal in the restaurant where the restaurant had cooked the school grown produce for them. So it was pretty nice. So we supply about 4 to 5 restaurants a year. We focus on the restaurants that are easy to get along with and aren't picky. And if they are picky, we give them many other suggestions for people that will deliver produce for them. So it's about having a positive relationship and working with someone who's already bought into the story, and you don't really have to convince them. Those are your friends that you want to keep with you. Another thing is looking at how we could distribute and sell produce right at the school level without moving it. So this might also be appropriate for your community. On the one picture on the left there with the mom in the minivan, she would come to pick up her son every day after school, and there's a bit of a driveway in between the front door of the school and the garden. And one day she just rolled down her window and was like, "What do you have?" And then we were like, "Oh, these people are here to pick up their kids. We could be selling them food." So the students started an after-school veggie drive-through, and as parents would come to pull through, they would actually ask them what they needed, and they would have stuff there and then sell them stuff through the window, which is thinking of who's already in your space and how could you get them on board without even having to advertise or market or attract other people. The photo on the right there where there's kind of a selection of stuff, that is a teacher harvest share is what we call it. It's kind of like a CSA. So instead of having folks pay for a whole season, we'll do it either in the spring or in the fall. We get the grade 11, for us there's a grade 11 marketing class in Ontario. They create posters. They actually walk around and advertise the basket of produce to the teachers in the school. So they're doing some face-to-face marketing. They collect orders and handle cash. So they're tracking all the sales. And then our co-op students support the harvesting and pre-packaged things that get delivered to the teachers. And we sell it at a reduced price. So thinking of who's already in your space that might be able to purchase or make use of what you have is a great strategy. And then we also take a lot of food to the farmer's market. So we do about, well, that was our farmer's market. We do about 4 farmer's markets a season. For us, that is where the students are learning the most transferable job skills. The students that we're working with, we understand, especially growing up in Toronto, that there's not a lot of farming jobs for them after this. We're not preparing a bunch of farmers for their future career in farming. But we can give them transferable job skills like handling money, multitasking, talking to customers, keeping a positive attitude when someone is complaining. Those types of skills they learn at the market. So for us, it's important that we maintain quite a lot of our produce going to the farmer's market because that's where the students are engaged. They have to show up at the farmer's market an hour early. They set up the tent, they merchandise all the produce, they put out all the signs, they handle cash, they process the float at the end of the night. So high expectations is a key part of our program. We do a lot of cooking. We do a weekly cooking class that features produce that's coming from the garden. Partly we realized that often when we were offering students to take food home, they didn't want it. And we realized that it was because they they didn't really eat it. They weren't used to eating it. And they didn't really know how to prepare it. So part of it is a life skill for themselves to be able to say, well, what do you do when you have a lot of zucchini or when you have a lot of kale? We try and think of, for everything that we grow, we want the students to have 3 ways of cooking it. It also means that our sales go way up, because when someone comes to the farmer's market and says, oh, what should I do with the Swiss chard? If you say like, oh, well, some onions and garlic and olive oil and lemon juice, then anyone will buy it. If you say just mix it with some onions and garlic and salt and pepper and lemon juice. So that's really important for us. The other piece is that we work with the students basically 3 days a week from April to May, and then 5 days a week from the middle of May to June. And then back when the school year starts again, we have students outside during class time, 5 days a week from September to, for us, our season kind of slows down the end of October. The way that we manage that is that the students come out with the whole class will come, and the teacher will come with them. We'll ask the teacher what's going on in their classroom that we might want to connect to in terms of a curriculum expectation, but we're not responsible for necessarily making that link. Our relationship is that we provide the work that needs to be done in the farm that day. We'll connect the teacher and see if we want to connect it, but then they'll often do the work of connecting it to whatever curriculum they're doing. It makes it easier for us to take whatever class wants to come. And we can also brainstorm with teachers to help them figure out how they want to tie it into the other work that they're doing in their classroom. So at some of the schools that we work in, we're now in 4 schools. We have, some of them have a horticulture class, some of them don't. Some of them have a tech program, and some of them are more academically focused. One of our schools has a key skills program, which means half the students are actually in a non-diploma program. So it's a real mix, and part of our success is that we're very flexible. We're not very prescriptive about what it means to come out to the farm. Very flexible about what the students actually want to be doing, and what the teacher is interested in covering, and then being able to find a way to connect it. And you can always find a way to connect it. Another big piece is really valuing what the students are interested in and honoring their expertise around food. So one of the things we worked on is we got a little bit of funding to write, as our program developed, write a curriculum for our program. And we realized that having adults tell young people what is important for them to learn is often how curriculum gets created. And what would happen if we asked young people to tell young people what's important to learn? So we actually hired students into paid positions as curriculum writers, and they wrote a food justice curriculum for our program that's rooted in their experience with food in their neighborhood. And now when students come to the school-grown program, they're learning things that the students in the program themselves have deemed to be the most important thing that you need to learn about food, which has been a flip of how curriculum is written. It's usually written by subject-specific adults who may not be of the community in which the curriculum is going to be used, and we basically flip that around, which was a really interesting process. So that means that often the food that we produce at the school is going to farmers markets, restaurants, and then it's also being used at the school. It looks different at each school. Some of them have hospitality programs, some of them don't. Some of them have cafeterias, and some of them don't. This is a picture of the rooftop. This was the lunch at Eastdale Collegiate, and in it has rooftop peppers and carrots and eggplant. So there's lots of opportunities for the food to actually go into the lunch program and be cooked by the students and eaten by the students. Which helps them care more about growing it if they know that they're going to be eating it, or if they know that someone's going to be eating it. They're a lot more invested in it. We have other examples in Toronto too that would be great for you to check out. This one is a teacher at Don Mills Collegiate. We've done some consulting with him, but really he's running a school farm entirely on his own with no external community partner. I would recommend that you have an external community partner. It really helps out. They can access grants that maybe you can't apply for. They can be flexible in providing extra staffing where you might be more restricted in terms of what a teacher can and can't do. But this garden here, he built entirely during class time, and he sourced those grants on his own. And he also, new to this space, built an outdoor teaching kitchen. So the students are harvesting and cooking in the space himself. So there are examples of schools kind of doing this on their own. Another great one to know is called Packed Grow to Learn. They're from Ontario. A lot like us in what they offer, but one of the cool things is that they have a cob oven and chickens that they actually, hens, like laying hens that they keep at the school. So lots of different options in terms of what you can actually do with space. I think what I really wanted to be able to do is answer some questions. We've done a lot of things like wrong and learned quite a lot, so it would be great to learn more about what people want to know about. So do I need to share this back to you, Laura, or is that okay?
Nope, we
great.
can still both be co-hosts.
Okay, great.
So, Katie, thank you so much. There's a lot that you covered in that. I'm sure that it's generated a lot of questions. I just having had a quick look at the registrations, I know we've got some folks from school districts. I know we have some folks who are working with public health. We have people working with community organizations. So we've got a broad range of potential partners in this kind of scenario. And so I would invite everybody to consider what questions that you might have for Katie. So as a reminder, you can put your questions in the chat box. That is a very easy way for me to know that you have a question. Or you can, there is a function where you can raise your hand, and I'll notice, hopefully I'll notice that icon and I'll see you have a question. So while we're waiting for all those questions to come in, I am trying to imagine what this looks like for students. So if I understood correctly, some students are not doing this for credit, but they'll come as part of their regular class, like their teacher is interested in using farming, using the market garden for their classes. And so they would come out on an occasional basis. Is that correct?
Yep.
And then there are students who would be doing it for credit, like that is part of their program credit. Yeah. So can you when it comes to the second one where they're getting credit, can you walk me through what it looks like to be involved in that, just given how the gardening season doesn't always line up with the semesters?
Yep. So the example of co-op, do you have something like co-op in New Brunswick, like a workplace credit? Okay, I see some nodding. That's great. So in that case, we just have the school place students with us as the employer. And then in that case, they're still tied to like a co-op teacher and a co-op class, and they have work to do in that case. So that's a fairly straightforward and easy way to manage that. Another example is at Eastdale Collegiate. One of the teachers worked with us to actually create a locally developed course, which is something you can do in Ontario. I'd imagine you'd be able to do that in New Brunswick as well. But we've actually created a course that's specific to Eastdale Collegiate that's called Seed to Market that students can register for. And it's a course about urban agriculture. Depending on what semester it runs in, the growing season part of the semester, they're actually outside every day seeding and weeding and harvesting. And in the other part of the semester, they do community food exploration projects. So they'll make a video about a community food project that's happening in their neighborhood, and it's more of a participatory action approach. And what it did is it connected the curriculum expectations around media studies and environmental studies together to create a new course. At another school, that wasn't really a good fit, and so they've worked it into their science curriculum really heavily, and like every grade 9 science student comes out to the garden regularly during the growing season. What I would recommend is to just think about the space that you're in and think about who's on board and then work with those people. So if it's the science department, or if it's more of the hospitality program or whatever it is, or co-op, whoever's really bought into it, start there, engage them, it'll work, and then other people will see it working. And then you can say that this could also work for X class or curriculum level or that type of thing. We have some students who never once actually come out and work in the garden just because of the makeup of their class schedule and what they're interested in. But even those students will stop and notice like that plants are growing in front of their school. And they'll notice that the tomatoes got bigger, and they'll come over and ask if they can sample a tomato, even though they weren't involved. So even when students aren't, and we have other students who worked with us for 3 years and they know how to trellis tomatoes like a pro. So, but even for the students who aren't deeply involved, there's still a real benefit to just like witnessing food production really close in a way that you're seeing it every day and you're witnessing those changes. So I would say start with whatever is easiest, with lowest barriers, and then grow from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a lot, there's so many multiple layers of impact from urban agriculture, but from any agriculture that's happening close to where humans live. It can be measured in so many different ways. So luckily, all the questions are pouring in. This is very exciting. I will give a moment to invite that the people with the questions can actually ask it themselves. So I'm going to unmute HHS Greenhouse. If you have a mic, then please, you can ask your question to Katie.
Hello, my name is Chris. I'm working with a group of grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 students at Hampton High.
Hey.
And we have just finished the construction of a high school greenhouse. We haven't got it finished. It's weather tight, and we're now looking at seeds and what sort of plants we want to grow inside. And one of the questions we had was what might have been some of the mistakes you encountered in your early years that we might learn from?
Oh my gosh, we've made so many mistakes. So know that you will make mistakes. Some of the things that we had to shift was make sure that you know what you're going to do with what you grow. So, and then work from there to plan what you actually seed and grow. So I would say we grew a lot of mustard greens because we thought that people would really like mustard greens, and then we discovered that the appetite for mustard greens at our farmer's market was not that great. But knowing like who's actually going to be eating your food, is your food going to be destined for the school cafeteria? Well, what do they actually use the most? And then those maybe should be the things that you grow. If you're going to be using your greenhouse to maybe so I guess the other mistake is to know when you don't have a lot of labor. So do you have access to your greenhouse over the summer? If you don't have regular access, or you'll have a lot less support for summer maintenance, then design a growing plan that involves very low labor in the summer. So for example, you could really use your greenhouse to grow tons and tons and tons of seedlings, knowing that you're going to host a plant giveaway and give them all away to the communities in your neighborhood surrounding your school, and that maybe your greenhouse is just going to not be active over the summer, and then in the fall you're going to do a lot of fall crops that could go directly into your cafeteria. So we've done a lot of accidentally growing a lot of something and then having no home for it, or not growing a lot of something and realizing that people were really interested in that thing. So the best thing when coming up with your plan for what you're going to grow is to think about where the food's going to go, and realistically how much help are you going to have throughout the entire season, because you might have a lot of students in May and June but no one in July and August. And if you design a crop plan that requires a lot of labor and watering and weeding and seeding over the summer, then it's going to fail. And you could design a crop plan where you're just growing a lot of garlic, and that takes almost no maintenance, but it's really high yield, or like potatoes and squash, for example. So knowing your audience is a key one. Understanding access is huge when you're working with schools, and any institutional setting is like, can you get in over March break? Can you get in in evenings and weekends? Understanding that if you don't have that access, that you plan that you might, if you're especially growing in a greenhouse, if there's a long weekend and you can't water over that time, that maybe you grow more plants than you think you might actually need, because you know that you'll lose some because you won't be able to water as frequently if you had like regular access. We've lost a lot of plants to the hot long weekend in like May or something like that when you couldn't get in. So just to plan for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And that's awesome to hear about the Hampton High School Greenhouse Project. That's the first I'm hearing of it. Chris, I hope that we can connect more so I can learn more after. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Jill Van Horen. She has a question.
Hi. So because New Brunswick is a very rural province and we may not have access to the same type of market that Torontonians would. So we're wondering if you have maybe any suggestions for applying this model in a rural setting that might not have access to those, markets or restaurants or what have you. And then also maybe, whether or not you've had some barriers around bringing the food into cafeterias, like depending on whether there's a cafeteria contractor that takes care of that food work.
Yeah. So I would say you want to grow, like, it's kind of the same thing. You want to grow for where the food's going to go. So if you know that you're not going to have a lot of high-end restaurants buying high-end foods, then you don't want to grow a lot of tiny, cute vegetables that take a lot of extra labor. The reason those cost more is because you need to harvest them more often, and they take more time, time to maintain. So I would say if you knew that you didn't have a lot of outlets, the things that take lower labor are better for you because your costs will be way, way, way less. So you don't need to worry about making more revenue if your costs are a lot lower. So things like winter squash that you plant once and you just let them go, basically, they don't take that much maintenance. Indeterminate tomatoes, like sauce tomatoes that you don't have to prune. And then think about things that you could grow that are low labor, could give you high bulk, and that you could then maybe can and process. So like tomato sauces are perfect. Things like potatoes, the winter squash, onions, you can store. So you could look at something like and I think it might be just be in Ontario, but there's a program called, I think it's called Fresh from the Farm. And instead of selling like candy bars as a fundraiser, you sell to parents like a bag of apples or a bag of potatoes. So you could look at just growing tons and tons and tons of potatoes. You don't need to be concerned about the fact that they take a lot of space and are relatively low value, whereas in Toronto, we're looking at maximum revenue generation per square foot. Harvest all those potatoes and then sell them as a fundraiser for the communities in your school, or give them away to the communities in your school if you don't actually need to make that money. So I would think it's really just thinking about who, like, you got to grow for where the food's going to go. Food banks love bulk storage crops. So even just doing an expansive market garden where the majority of the food is going to a food bank is beautiful, right? Is a great way to feed your community. It all depends on how much. For us, we need to hit about $30,000 in sales every year to keep the program going in addition to our grants. But if we didn't go to farmers markets, we would have less gas costs, farmers market vendor fees, less labor, then we could reduce some of our high labor, and then the revenue wouldn't be so important. In terms of accessing schools, you should check with your local public health department around what foods can be served in schools and what standards they have. In our area, as long as things are you follow the good handling, like food handling practices, then they are okay to be served in schools. We're very lucky in that all the schools that we work with have cafeterias that are operated by the school themselves. So there's a culinary teacher who's running the cafeteria as part of the hospitality program. It looks really different in every school, but we don't have like an Aramark or a Sodexo or anything where we had to really make that work. But I have talked to some folks who the barrier is in their cafeteria program, but they can do a morning, like you could grow just kale in your garden and have a smoothie program in the morning. And if you could do that as a way of getting around the cafeteria, I know that some cafeterias have like very strict contracts where you couldn't even do a smoothie program, but I'm thinking of where else could you, is it a cooking club? Is it in-class cooking? Like, where are the other places where you can access food in the school that's outside of the cafeteria? While at the same time saying, like, this is silly that you won't take it. And talk to, like, your superintendent or whoever's within your board to say, like, how could we make this work so that you're using the food? Yeah.
Great, thank you. So Katie mentioned a fresh food fundraiser for schools. The Department of Agriculture, Aquaculture, and Fisheries opened a subsidies program to fund fresh food fundraisers the last deadline, the first deadline, which just passed, was February 1st. But I put a link to it in the chat box in case that's something that people want to kind of keep on their radar. I believe it will be opening up again soon. So the next question comes from Catherine Glencross. So Catherine, if you want to ask your question to Katie. Oh, I don't seem to be able to. Are we playing mute tag, Catherine?
We are.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
I had muted it on my end. Sorry. Hi, Katie.
Hey.
We're a K-8 school. I do have a garden, a farm garden, and we started a big one last year. So we started with a postage stamp, like really small. Now we're bigger. But I was wondering, in Ontario, have you had that experience in the younger schools starting it? How does that work up there?
Yeah. So our like large production focused stuff is at the high school level.
Okay.
But we do a lot of smaller scale school gardens with the younger groups, especially like middle school and younger.
My middle school built it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then my little ones are the ones who gardening it. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, definitely tons of engagement. Super interested. Like even just the outside time and like the curiosity and like being able to explore that is huge. But I don't have much experience with trying to grow food for sale with like grade 2 students and trying to make that work. But we do have examples of teachers doing, we have one kindergarten class where they did harvest from the garden and they had their own parent farmers market. And everything was like 25 cents.
I like that idea.
Yeah, and they made like $6. And it was more about what are things worth? How do you make them look nice? How do you describe the flavor to someone who wants to buy it? Like those types of lessons rather than about the actual like revenue generation. We've had some really cute.
I like that idea. I think that my guys would like that.
Like just at pickup time is a pretty nice time to have that available. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
And then also another great model is having garden buddies, which is a nice one that works. So having an older grade partner with a younger grade, and then having kind of like a peer-to-peer model around garden education we found is really successful because like young people, the person they respect the most in the world is the person who's just slightly older than them. Like no matter what grade they're in, the person who's like 2 grades higher is like the coolest person in the world. So that peer-to-peer education of having a slightly older or like a middle school student work with an elementary school student to teach them about watering and weeding also then helps that middle school student really learn it because the act of teaching somebody something helps you deepen your understanding. So that's worked really well as well. And it also makes gardening cool because like a cool older kid likes it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Since we're talking about the younger grades, but really any grade and every grade, I'll take this moment to put in a little plug for another FoodShare program, which has gone national, has gone viral, has gone international, the Great Big Crunch. It's coming up on March 1st. I'll put the link in the chat box. This is a really fantastic program, or it's a celebration, a day to kick off Student Nutrition Month in March, where the schools are invited to have everybody crunch into a local apple at the exact same moment. Some really fun ways to do it are to get a student on the PA system, say 3, 2, 1, crunch. And there's just so many lesson plans and curriculum connections that you can make through that really fun activity. That's a project that has come out of FoodShare Toronto. So I'll put that in there for now and invite everybody who has ties to a school in New Brunswick to pick that up and get their school registered. I know that many New Brunswick schools have participated in the past, but it often depends on a champion being the one to actually go ahead and register and make it happen. And there's also really cheap apples available for schools, like at discount prices, from local orchards like Bellevaux Orchards. So yeah, like Principal Heather Dixon in Sackville, New Brunswick has just put in the comment box, it's the cutest. It's a really great program. So little plug for the Great Big Crunch. Okay, so now there's a question that's come in from Kath HM. So maybe Kath, you can introduce yourself. I've just put you on unmute.
I'm Catherine as well, Catherine Hallis-Moulton. And we're just starting a greenhouse here at Honor Law. And I did get some funding from a couple different sources to build the greenhouse. And we're going to do ours with recycled windows as well, because it's part of environmental science. And we're hoping to start a compost too. We're doing some vertical gardening and some aquaponic gardening. So, but they're all small projects, like nothing like what you had, those pictures of your huge farm. But I was just wondering just about, I don't know if I'm out of the loop, but I was just wondering if there's people like your FoodShare program who can come in and actually, like, I don't know, do some of the teaching and suggesting and stuff like that. Like, it sounds like you were actually in the schools quite a bit. And I understand that there was funding available, but I don't know, maybe there's just an organization that'd be willing to come help and suggest and teach.
Laura, do you?
Yeah, that might be a better question for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are, I think that one huge advantage is that FoodShare Toronto has existed for decades in Toronto and has incubated and initiated so many programs, even just when it comes to urban agriculture programs, that they have been a structure to support that kind of programming. And that kind of structure is really key to the long-term success of projects and programs getting off the ground. There are organizations in New Brunswick that have taken the lead on projects like this. And when it comes to accessing funding, then the right partner will take different shapes and forms. So sometimes you'd need a nonprofit partner. Sometimes they need to have charitable status, depending on the kind of funding that can best kickstart the program. And there are organizations around different parts of New Brunswick. So Catherine, if you want to send me an email, we can brainstorm great organizations that you can connect with for Bonner Law. And I think that we'll be able to come up with a few different ideas. Because the infrastructure is not quite as advanced for that kind of organizational support in New Brunswick. Sometimes it takes a little bit of maneuvering and really kind of chatting with a bunch of people to find the right home for a project like this. But we do have a lot of community support that has seen great projects get off the ground and stay around for a long time in New Brunswick. Yeah, let's chat more about that. I'm going to put my email immediately in the chat box.
Okay, thank you.
And in terms of all of the resources that are being shared, this webinar is being recorded and I'll send it back out to all of the participants. There's other resources that we can share along from the New Brunswick Food Security Action Network website as well. And I'll put a little plug to sign up for our newsletter as well, because this is exactly the kind of resource that we share as we go. We've also been starting to put together a map of food security assets in New Brunswick, and that includes organizations and community gardens and other groups that have developed some organizational structure to support these kinds of programs. Okay, thanks so much, Kath, for your question. Let me get to my list. Who was next? We have Michael Freeman, who has a question.
Hi, I guess I'm on. So in working as an external partner, I've found in the past and even now, sometimes it's challenging to get the ball rolling on projects because educators and administrators in schools are pretty busy just running their schools and running their classes. And I was curious as to what sort of strategies or workarounds you found for that working with FoodShare.
Yeah, I mean, teachers are busy and they have so much that's expected of them, and it's often not an issue of them wanting to do it. Right? Like the desire is there and the buy-in is there. It's just the time. I would say anytime that we've been able to do the heavy lifting around grant writing and accessing resources and funding, if I approach a school or if a school approaches us and we say we want to work together, and it relies on them doing quite a lot of work. It doesn't tend to go anywhere just because they have so much other stuff on their plate. But if I come and say we have $10,000 for someone to be able to do weekly visits in staff time, they're much more likely to get back to you like quickly. I would also say lower risk and lower cost entry points are a great place to start. So if you haven't yet, I would never develop a market garden of the scale that Bendale and Eastdale have without first having worked with the school for at least a couple months and really get a sense of the administrator, the principal, the teachers who are on board, and then go after the larger scale ones. One thing that we use a lot is these, we could put it in the box, but these indoor tower gardens, and it's a standalone hydroponic unit that just plugs into the wall. It has lights on it. You can, when you're done using it, you can just unplug it, and it's a low risk, like the garden's not going to die and look terrible and tell people the message that these projects are too hard. So a lower risk, sort of easier entry point, like a tower garden, a hydroponic unit, or an aquaponic system that's small scale. And then if you do something small and it works really well, even just like a couple large planters that are movable that you just do potatoes in, and then you get a win. And then you say, well, we could expand this into, you know, this larger site over here, or we could expand the number of containers, that type of stuff. Also developing, like figuring out who the champions are that are already sold, whether they're school board trustees or principals or a superintendent, and then work with those people to find the first piece of entry. Often we have people will identify a site and then work against someone who's just it's not their priority. They're focused on some other very important piece of the way that the school operates. So instead of picking a site and then trying to force it in, is to pick the people that are already calling you, or maybe you've heard them talk about food at an event or something, and then go from there to connect with the people. Because especially when you get into large scale projects, like the rooftop at Eastdale probably almost didn't happen like 4 times, like a firm no from the school board. And the only way that we got it to work was because the principal was like, I can call so-and-so who can talk to so-and-so who can get us on the agenda in this special committee. And as an external partner, we would have just got a no. Like they would have just not answered our question. So you need the champion who's within the institution to be your friend. And then they're going to figure out all of the inside pieces. And then you also have a lot of leverage you have as an external partner in terms of maybe accessing funding or doing work outside of like the regular time that you can bring in to help that partnership. By far the best school farming projects that I've seen are a partnership between a school and a nonprofit, like 100%. And at times the school is very, very involved, but at times this, like, schools have seasons and they have all kinds of stuff going on, and to be able to have a community partner support keeping a project going is what makes it last long term.
Awesome, thank you.
And having a partnership agreement. If they look into having a partnership agreement with your school board, and that helps reduce a lot of any roadblocks that if you then are speaking with principals, often the first question they'll have for us is, do you already work with the school board, and do you have a partnership agreement? And when they see that you do, then like their defenses go way down, because they know that someone at the board has already kind of validated your work, so to speak. You don't have to go through the like proving yourself each time. Yeah.
That's
Cool.
great. Great advice.
But good luck. That's great. Yeah.
Okay, so Chad Duplessis had a question, and I know he had to leave to take a call,
Okay.
but I'm sure his question will be of interest to others. He asks, have you been able to create metrics around student hours and food production, understanding that there are variables to growing food?
So we do a lot of tracking. So we keep, we used to do it by paper, which we still do sometimes when we have a lot of students, because sometimes you're like, you need something for them to do. So you're like, here, track this. But we've started using Google Forms. So every single thing that we grow, and anytime a student engages with the garden, we track it. And we try and do it. We use Google Forms because it means that our staff can just update it either on their phone or when they just get back to their desk and say, this is how many students we worked with, or this is how much food we've grown. And that helps like immeasurably with funding applications and also in conversations with the school board. So a lot of people in the school board know sort of us, but they don't know what we do. So if we can say that we've hired, in the past 5 years, we've employed 95 students and we've grown 40,000 pounds of food and we've raised $200,000 in farm revenue, then they start saying, oh, well, this is actually a big deal and I should take your question seriously. So it helps leverage more money. And it also helps you do your own evaluations around, are we kind of on track with where we want to be and where we were last year? And if there are changes, how do we account for those and were those good changes or bad changes? So it also helps your program be a lot better. But Google Forms is like very nice. It really helps you keep track of data and analyze it a lot quicker, especially when you have multiple people working on a project. So yeah.
That's great. So I like how your metrics are so nicely displayed on the FoodShare website, on your program site.
Oh, yeah.
So I just put that link up there so that people can see. So I don't see any more questions coming in. We've just got a couple minutes left. Katie, what would be your 3 top tips if somebody wants to start in on the path to one day have capacity like Bendale does now,
Yeah.
for instance?
They're probably similar to what I said, but I would say find your champion, and your champion, identify who the decision maker is, but the decision maker might not be your champion. And you should know who your decision maker is, but you should know who's going to actually fight for you to help you along the way when they say, wait a minute, you can't put that there. What about our mowing or something, and you need someone who says, oh, you know what? It's not a big deal. We're going to do it this way. So that's fine. I would say any outdoor project along the lines of mowing is make sure that you are super kind and friendly and welcoming and loving to anyone who is responsible for facilities where you are. Share produce with them. Be proactive about telling them what is happening in the space if you're getting soil delivered or that type of thing, because especially with union contracts and things like that, it's really important to have those people know what you're up to, and know that you respect them and that you share that information with them. So I think that that's an often long forgotten often forgotten or like back of mind thing for people, but that it's actually really important, that that's a big piece of someone's job, that they know kind of what's going on. And I would say that whatever you do should be rooted in your community, and what makes the most sense for what you have and who's there and where you want to be going. So it might make no sense for you to build a Bendale where you are, or to take your food to farmers market. And I think even you can see that in our example of we're at 4 schools and all 4 of those schools run differently. The infrastructure looks different. What we grow there is different. How the students are involved is totally different, even though they're all part of the same program called School Grown. It depends on the culture of the school. It depends on what the students are really interested in. And then also making sure that you make space for students to actually drive what's happening and where things are going, and that they have meaningful ways to engage and share what they think is important. Those are the things that will help you create something that lasts longer than the first year of funding. Yeah, and then also that a lot of our crop plans and like a lot of that stuff is all online, and we will freely give it to you happily. So if you ever are down the road with a project and you think that you just want to check in with somebody and see what would be a good next step, I'm always happy for you to send me an email.
Katie, is that what we'd find in the lessons learned, the webinar series?
Yeah. And then there's a few, there's a harvesting guide that the students wrote. There's the curriculum that the students wrote. There's a guide to selling at farmers market. There's a bunch of resources there.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So we've just reached the end of time, not the end of all time, but the end of our time. And I want to just put up a couple last links. I promised I'd put in a plug for our newsletter, and there's also information about a new urban teaching farm that is, wait, where did that go? There, that is, oh, I've put it up twice now, you can't ignore it, that is starting up in Fredericton. I want to take the time to say thank you so much, Katie. This has been a really engaging webinar. There's so much to be learned from what Schoolgrown has done, and I'm very excited to see if, when, and how New Brunswickers will riff off of it to figure something even more building on our school programs here. So
That's great.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad to share, and reach out always.
So I'll be sending the recording to everybody who's registered with their email through Eventbrite. And yeah, stay tuned, because it looks like the New Brunswick Food Security Action Network might do some more webinars.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.